The Mandalorian, a bedtime story. Part 1. The Lone Hunter. Far across the galaxy, beyond crowded worlds and glittering cities, walked a lone figure in silver armor. His boots pressed into the soft sand of a quiet desert, leaving footprints that the wind would soon erase. He was a Mandalorian, a hunter, a wanderer. The desert stretched endlessly beneath twin moons, casting silver and green shadows across jagged rocks. The wind whispered around him, carrying faint sounds, creatures moving in the distance, the rustle of sand, and the quiet hum of the galaxy itself. He paused for a moment, listening. Every sound mattered, every shift in the air could be a warning, or simply the world speaking softly. His armor reflected the faint light, scratched and dented from countless battles. Each mark was a story, proof that he had endured challenges no one else could see. Beneath it, he carried silence, a companion he had known longer than any friend. He approached his ship, a patched vessel waiting on a distant plateau. It was not elegant or shiny. It was worn, scarred, and loyal. Every dent and patch told a story of survival, storms weathered, battles survived, and missions completed. Inside, the cockpit hummed softly, comforting like a heartbeat. He stowed his weapons carefully, a long rifle, smooth from repeated use, a pistol polished to a faint sheen, and a short blade tucked securely at his side. He sometimes closed his eyes beneath the helmet, thinking of the past. Of distant forests where sunlight filtered through ancient trees, and oceans that stretched endlessly, glimmering like mirrors. He remembered the first lessons of survival, the first taste of danger, and the first time he had been truly alone. The ship lifted into the sky, engines glowing softly against the darkening horizon. The desert shrank below, and the stars began to grow brighter as he rose higher. Worlds stretched out beneath him. Ice-covered rocks, oceans reflecting suns, forests dense and green, cities towering above the clouds. Each world had life, each world had stories, and he drifted through them quietly, leaving no trace except the shadow of a lone hunter moving across endless worlds. He was a hunter, yes, but he was also something more. Beneath the armor and the weapons, he carried a quiet longing, a sense that the galaxy had plans for him he had yet to understand. For now, he was alone. The stars were his companions, the silence, his guide, and the way was his path. Somewhere in the galaxy, awaited a small, fragile presence that would soon change his life forever. But tonight, the Mandalorian remained alone, silent, steady, moving across the endless stars. After days of traveling through silent stars and distant worlds, the Mandalorian arrived on a quiet, forested planet. Mist curled around ancient trees, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and growing life. This place was far from bustling cities and crowded ports. Here, the galaxy seemed to breathe slowly, and every sound carried across the stillness. He stepped from his ship, boots pressing into soft moss. The forest was alive with quiet motion, leaves trembling with unseen creatures, branches swaying under the gentle wind, and somewhere in the distance, a soft trickle of water. As he moved forward, his eyes caught something unusual. A small, floating cradle drifted through the trees, carried by some unseen force. Inside it, a tiny figure peered out. Green skin, wide, curious eyes, and ears that twitched at every sound. The Mandalorian froze. His hand rested on his rifle, instinct sharp. Yet the child made no move to flee, no cry to demand attention. It simply looked at him, calm and unafraid. There was something ancient in those eyes, something that seemed to see beyond him, beyond the forest, beyond the galaxy itself. He approached slowly, careful not to startle the fragile being. Every step was deliberate, measured. The child reached out instinctively as he knelt, tiny fingers brushing against the armor. A flicker of something unfamiliar stirred in the Mandalorian, a feeling he had not known in years, curiosity, concern, and a quiet, protective instinct. For the first time in a long while, he felt that his life might no longer belong entirely to the way. He looked around, scanning the forest. No one else was there. No sign of danger. It was as if the planet itself had held its breath, waiting for this moment. The child made a soft cooing sound, and the cradle floated closer to the Mandalorian. He reached out his armored hand, touching the small head gently. The sensation was strange, unfamiliar, but comforting in a way he could not explain. "This is not part of the mission," he whispered, though there was no one to hear. And yet, somehow, the child seemed to understand. He stood slowly, cradle in hand, and felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. The galaxy had given him a new purpose, something small, fragile, and yet immensely powerful. He did not know what it would mean, or what dangers would follow, but he knew that he could not ignore it. The forest seemed alive around them. Birds flitted through the mist, leaves rustled softly, and distant waterfalls whispered across the rocks. The child looked around curiously, head tilting, wide eyes taking in the strange surroundings. The Mandalorian adjusted the cradle, ensuring the child was secure. For a long moment, they simply stood there together, alone in the quiet forest, connected by an unspoken understanding. He thought of his creed, his training, the life he had led. Everything had been about survival, about honor, about moving silently through the galaxy. But now, holding this small life in his hands, he realized that the way could mean more. It could mean protection, it could mean care, it could mean hope. Eventually, he turned back to his ship. The engines hummed softly as they prepared to lift off. The forest faded below, and stars began to appear, bright against the dark sky. The child cooed softly, floating in the cradle. The Mandalorian adjusted his grip, glancing at the stars that had guided him for so long. The galaxy was vast, filled with danger and uncertainty, but now he was not entirely alone. Somewhere out there, a fragile green life had entered his path, and the way would guide them both. The journey had changed, and though he did not yet know what lay ahead, the Mandalorian felt a quiet certainty. He would protect this child, no matter the cost. And so, they traveled together, ship gliding silently through the stars, a lone hunter and a small, green companion, bound by fate and the quiet whispers of the galaxy. The stars watched them as they passed, silent witnesses to the beginning of a bond that would shape the destiny of both. The ship drifted through space, quiet and steady. Stars stretched endlessly outside the cockpit, tiny lights scattered across a sea of darkness. For most, the galaxy felt too vast, too empty. But for the Mandalorian, silence was familiar. It was the sound of survival. Yet now, the silence was different. Because in the corner of the cockpit, a small cradle floated gently, and inside it, a pair of wide, curious eyes watched every flicker of light. The child reached out often, tiny fingers grasping at stars that remained forever out of reach. The Mandalorian sat at the controls, silent, steady, gloved hands adjusting the ship's course. He pretended not to notice the child's movements. But inside, beneath the helmet, a quiet warmth stirred. They passed through asteroid fields, rocks glowing faintly in reflected starlight. The ship twisted and rolled with practiced ease, moving between drifting giants that had floated in silence for thousands of years. The Mandalorian's grip was steady, his focus sharp. Yet, when he glanced to the side, the child laughed softly, delighted by the dance of stone and shadow. For a moment, the hunter allowed himself to breathe, to feel that small sound fill the cockpit. It was something he had not heard in years, laughter, pure and innocent. Later, when the ship settled into hyperspace, the stars stretched into long, endless streams of light. The child watched in awe, eyes reflecting the brilliance, ears twitching at the hum of the engines. The Mandalorian leaned back, listening to the soft sound of breathing that was not his own. It felt strange, comforting, unsettling, and deeply unfamiliar. He thought of his creed. The way had always been clear: to fight, to endure, to protect the Mandalorian way of life. But now, a small presence challenged that clarity. Not with weapons, not with power, but with something far stronger: innocence. On the third day of travel, the ship descended onto a trading outpost. At the edge of the outer rim, metal towers rose from dusty ground, glimmering faintly beneath a pale sun. Here, merchants called out in a dozen languages and droids clicked and whirred through crowded streets. The Mandalorian stepped carefully, the cradle floating beside him. Every eye seemed to turn. Some stared at the armor, others at the child. But the hunter's steady presence kept questions unspoken. He gathered supplies: fuel cells, food packs, and new parts for the ship. The child peeked from the cradle, eyes wide, curious at every sound. Vendors leaned closer, charmed by the small figure. The Mandalorian's hand stayed close to his blaster, reminding all who watched that this fragile life was not unguarded. As the sun dipped low, painting the towers in red and gold, the pair returned to the ship. The child reached for the sky, pointing at the setting sun. The Mandalorian paused, helmet tilting, and for the briefest of moments, he wondered if he had ever noticed a sunset with such care before. That night, stars filled the sky above the outpost, a blanket of light stretched across the dark. The Mandalorian rested in the cockpit, weapons at his side, while the child drifted to sleep. The ship hummed softly, and the hunter's thoughts wandered. This life was not what he had planned. He had been alone for so long, moving from mission to mission, his path set by contracts and survival. But now, with each soft breath from the cradle, with each curious glance from those wide eyes, something was changing. When morning came, the engines roared once more, and the ship lifted into the sky. The outpost shrank below, lost among dust and towers, while the stars grew brighter ahead. The Mandalorian did not speak, but his resolve was clear. He would protect this child. No matter the cost, no matter the danger, the way now had a new meaning, and the journey had only just begun. The stars stretched endlessly outside the ship's viewport, silent witnesses to the journey of a lone hunter and a small, green companion. The galaxy was vast, filled with worlds of beauty and danger alike. The Mandalorian guided the ship carefully, every movement deliberate. He had learned long ago that one wrong decision could mean disaster. The child floated beside him, eyes wide, watching the endless streaks of light in hyperspace. Yet, even among the stars, danger was never far away. A group of bounty hunters, drawn by rumor and reward, tracked their path across the outer rim. They would strike without warning, and the Mandalorian knew this all too well. On the 5th day of travel, a sudden alarm rang through the ship. Red lights flashed, and the hum of engines changed pitch. The Mandalorian's hand went to his blaster instinctively, and his eyes scanned the sensors. Unidentified ships approaching, he murmured, helmet tilting slightly. The child looked up, curious but calm, unaware of the danger looming just outside the hull. The first attack came without hesitation. Blaster fire streaked across the void, sparks bouncing off the hull as the Mandalorian maneuvered. His training was precise, each movement smooth, a dance of survival. Yet his mind was not on glory or reward. It was on the small life beside him, on protecting the fragile presence that had changed his path. For hours, they evaded and countered, dodging laser fire and outmaneuvering faster ships. The child watched, fascinated, but never cried. Sometimes, tiny fingers reached out, touching the armor of the Mandalorian, as if offering comfort, or perhaps reminding him of why he fought. Finally, the attackers gave up, vanishing into the void as silently as they had appeared. The cockpit fell quiet again. The Mandalorian's breathing was steady, but his thoughts wandered. The galaxy was full of danger. Every system held threats, every star hid secrets, and yet, he could not turn back. For the child, he would continue. No matter the trials, no matter the cost. They landed briefly on a barren moon to refuel and repair. The ground was cracked and dry, colored in shades of gray and brown. A weak sun barely warmed the surface, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers. The Mandalorian worked quickly, his hands moving over tools with practiced precision. The child floated nearby, observing everything, occasionally making small noises of curiosity. Sometimes the hunter paused to look at the child, seeing the wonder in those large eyes, feeling a pull in his chest that had nothing to do with missions or contracts. It was a gentle tug, quiet but persistent, a call to something deeper, something beyond the way he had known all his life. Night fell on the barren moon. Stars filled the sky, glittering against the darkness. The Mandalorian sat in the cockpit, weapons at his side, while the child drifted to sleep. The quiet hum of the ship filled the silence. For a brief moment, the hunter allowed himself to reflect. He had faced countless enemies, traveled across innumerable worlds, and survived challenges no ordinary person could endure. Yet nothing had prepared him for this, for the responsibility of another life. For the trust placed in him by a small, green child. He did not know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing with certainty. He would endure, he would protect, he would keep moving forward, no matter the trials the galaxy placed before him. Morning came slowly, and the barren moon faded behind them as the ship lifted once more. The child cooed softly, reaching toward the stars. The Mandalorian guided the vessel steadily, feeling the weight of responsibility settle in his chest. The galaxy was wide, filled with trials and dangers yet unseen. But he and the child would face them together, moving quietly through the endless stars, a lone hunter and the fragile presence that had changed his path forever. The ship glided silently through the stars, its engines humming softly, a steady rhythm in the quiet. The Mandalorian sat at the controls, gloved hands resting lightly, eyes scanning the distant points of light. He had traveled far, across worlds of ice, desert, and metal, yet the memory of his past remained as vivid as the stars above. He thought of the creed, whispered to him as a child: honor above all. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Survive, endure, and walk the way. Those words had shaped him, guided him, carried him through countless dangers and silent nights. Now, with the child beside him, those echoes of the creed sounded different. They were not just instructions for survival. They were a reminder of responsibility, of protection, of the bonds that could be formed even in silence. The child stirred in the cradle, eyes wide, and reached a tiny hand toward him. The Mandalorian's armored hand hovered above, then gently touched the small fingers. It was a connection unspoken, a bond growing with each soft gesture. They passed a world of towering cliffs and misty valleys, shadows stretching like long fingers across jagged stone. The Mandalorian slowed the ship slightly, watching as tiny creatures scurried in the low light. He remembered his first lessons in survival: how to move silently, to watch, to endure. The creed had been his shield, a map through a galaxy filled with danger. But now, it was more than survival. It was guidance for this new path, a path that included someone smaller, softer, and entirely innocent. As night fell on another distant planet, he reflected on the warriors who had raised him, those who had protected him when he was a foundling. He had learned the way from them, but he had never learned about companionship like this. About caring for another, about the weight of a life entirely in your hands. The stars outside stretched endlessly, their quiet light filling the cockpit. The child cooed softly, tiny eyes following the trails of starlight. The Mandalorian felt a quiet warmth in his chest, the echo of the creed now paired with a new understanding. Protection could mean more than survival. It could mean love. They landed briefly on a forested moon, where silver streams reflected the light of a faint sun. The Mandalorian worked on minor repairs, tools in gloved hands moving with practiced ease. The child floated beside him, reaching toward the glowing water, curious and calm. For hours, he worked while the child explored safely, and the quiet moments allowed him to reflect. Every world they visited, every star they passed, was a reminder that the galaxy was both beautiful and dangerous. The creed guided him still, but now it was intertwined with a new sense of purpose: to protect, to nurture, to guide. Night returned, and the ship lifted once more into the quiet void. The child slept peacefully in the cradle, and the Mandalorian sat at the controls, watching the stars streak past. He thought of the past, of the creed, of all he had learned, endured, and survived. And he thought of the future, a future where he was no longer truly alone. The galaxy stretched endlessly before him, filled with challenges, dangers, and wonders. Yet, for the first time in many years, he felt a quiet certainty. Whatever trials lay ahead, he would face them together with the child. The stars blinked silently, and the hum of the ship was the only sound. The Mandalorian's thoughts drifted with the galaxy, and the creed echoed in his mind once more. This is the way. The ship glided through space, smooth and quiet, its engines humming softly like a heartbeat in the dark. The Mandalorian sat at the controls, steady and focused, while the child floated beside him, eyes wide with wonder. Ahead lay worlds he had never visited, planets filled with strange landscapes, unknown dangers, and secrets waiting quietly beneath alien skies. The galaxy was vast, and for every world they had crossed, countless others remained, unseen and uncharted. Their first stop was a planet of rolling purple plains, where the air shimmered faintly with particles of dust that glowed in the light of two pale suns. The Mandalorian guided the ship carefully, touching the controls with practiced precision. The child reached out toward the window, tiny fingers brushing against the glass as if wanting to touch the strange land below. He landed softly, boots pressing into the glowing dust. The Mandalorian scanned the area cautiously. No signs of life approached immediately, but shadows moved at the edges of vision, and the wind carried sounds strange to any human ears. The child floated beside him, cooing softly, seeming fascinated by every ripple of light, every sound of the alien world. The Mandalorian allowed himself a moment to observe, to breathe, to notice the beauty of a planet untouched. A creature emerged slowly from the distance, small and timid, with eyes reflecting the soft light. The child laughed, reaching out with tiny hands. The creature tilted its head curiously, approaching slowly, and for a brief moment, the Mandalorian saw the harmony of the galaxy, its dangers, its wonders, and its surprises, all coexisting in quiet balance. Later, they journeyed to a frozen moon, where ice cliffs rose like towers beneath a gray sky. The wind howled softly across the surface, carrying snow that sparkled in the dim light. The Mandalorian guided the ship to a sheltered crevice, shielding the child from the chill. He moved carefully across the icy terrain, checking the ship's hull for damage. The child watched, fascinated by the shifting ice, tiny eyes following every movement. The galaxy was full of wonders, and for the first time, the Mandalorian allowed himself to truly notice them. Night fell, and the stars reflected in the ice like scattered jewels. The Mandalorian rested in the cockpit, glancing at the sleeping child. He thought of all the worlds they had yet to visit, of dangers and creatures he could not yet imagine. And yet, despite the uncertainty, there was comfort in their quiet journey. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, and the child slept peacefully, a small presence amidst the vast galaxy. The Mandalorian understood then that no matter how unknown the worlds, no matter the threats they might face, they would face them together. The ship lifted off at first light, leaving the frozen moon behind. Shadows of ice cliffs lingered below, while the stars above grew brighter as they moved further into space. The Mandalorian's hands rested lightly on the controls, watching as the galaxy unfolded before them. Each planet, each star, each silent world was a story waiting to be discovered. And he, the lone hunter no longer entirely alone, was ready to meet them all. The galaxy was vast and full of secrets, but with the child beside him, with the way as his guide, he felt steady, capable, and unafraid. Together, they would explore every world unknown, moving quietly through the endless stars, a guardian and a small, green companion, bound by trust, curiosity, and fate. Softly outside the ship, spreading light across the endless darkness. The Mandalorian sat at the controls, steady and silent, while the child floated nearby, eyes wide with wonder. Each planet they visited brought new discoveries, strange landscapes, unusual creatures, and the subtle reminder that the galaxy was never truly empty. Yet, with each world, the Mandalorian began to feel something he had not felt in years, a quiet responsibility, a gentle, protective instinct that ran deeper than the creed itself. On a small, forested moon, mist curled around towering trees, and soft streams reflected the pale light of a distant sun. The Mandalorian guided the ship down carefully, boots pressing softly into the damp ground. The child floated beside him, tiny fingers brushing the leaves and reaching toward the sunlight. A sudden rustle drew his attention. From the shadows, a creature approached, small, timid, yet curious. It paused, watching them, its eyes wide and cautious. The child laughed softly, reaching out, and the creature, seemingly reassured, stepped closer. The Mandalorian watched quietly, realizing that protection was more than weapons and armor. It was patience, it was presence, it was the calm assurance that nothing would harm those under his care. Later, in the dense forest, they encountered deeper challenges. Fallen trees blocked paths, creatures of the night stirred unseen, and the wind carried whispers of distant dangers. The Mandalorian moved carefully, eyes scanning, hands ready, yet he found himself glancing at the child often, ensuring safety while navigating the unknown. The tiny presence beside him reminded him that strength was not only for battle, it was for guardianship, for being steady when the galaxy seemed uncertain. At night, they rested near a calm river, the water reflecting the stars above. The child slept in the floating cradle, tiny breaths rising and falling softly. The Mandalorian sat nearby, glancing at the gentle ripples of the water, his thoughts drifting. He reflected on the creed, on the lessons of survival, honor, and duty. But now, those lessons had taken on a new meaning. The way was no longer just about the Mandalorian alone. It was about protecting this fragile life, guiding it, and keeping it safe amidst the dangers of a vast galaxy. The next morning, the ship lifted silently from the forested moon, leaving streams and mist behind. The child cooed softly as the stars stretched past the viewport. The Mandalorian adjusted the cradle gently, glancing at the small, green companion who had changed everything he thought he knew. Across the endless stars, he felt the weight of guardianship settle into his chest. It was not a burden. It was a purpose. He would endure, protect, and guide, as the galaxy unfolded endlessly before them. The stars blinked quietly, silent witnesses to the bond forming between hunter and child. The Mandalorian's path was no longer solitary. He was no longer just a hunter, but a protector, steady and calm, moving through the endless expanse of the galaxy with a small life in his care, guided by the way, and by the quiet rhythm of trust. The galaxy stretched silently before them, stars blinking like distant candles in the endless dark. The ship glided smoothly through space, its engines humming a steady, soothing rhythm. The Mandalorian sat at the controls, gloved hands resting lightly, eyes scanning the quiet expanse. Beside him, the child floated peacefully, tiny breaths rising and falling softly. The journey had been long, filled with new worlds and gentle discoveries, but tonight, a deeper challenge awaited, one that tested not strength, but endurance and courage. They approached a planet shrouded in shadow, its surface covered with dark forests and jagged mountains. The landing was cautious, deliberate, each step measured to avoid danger. The air was thick, and the wind carried a cold, unfamiliar chill. Shadows moved just beyond vision, and the Mandalorian's senses were alert. He adjusted the cradle, ensuring the child was secure and comfortable. Tiny hands reached up, touching the armor, and the Mandalorian felt the familiar stir of protectiveness. Night deepened, the forest seemed alive, whispering secrets and hidden threats. Distant sounds of creatures echoed, branches snapping softly under unknown weight. The Mandalorian moved quietly, eyes scanning every movement, ears alert to every shift in the wind. A sudden noise broke the silence, a low, growling warning. From the shadows, a creature emerged, large and powerful, its eyes glinting in the dim light. The Mandalorian's blaster was ready, but he hesitated, knowing that fear could escalate the danger. The child stirred in the cradle, cooing softly as if sensing the tension. The Mandalorian's heart steadied, breathing slowly beneath the helmet, and he guided the creature away with calm authority. It paused, considering him, then retreated into the dark, leaving the forest still and silent once more. Hours passed slowly in the shadowed night. The Mandalorian remained vigilant, moving silently through the forest, every step careful, every glance deliberate. The child slept peacefully, unaware of the quiet dangers surrounding them. He thought of all the trials he had faced before, battles fought, enemies defeated, worlds survived. Yet nothing had prepared him for this. The responsibility of another life, the fragile trust of the small, green presence in his care. The way guided him still, but now it was tempered with patience, vigilance, and a gentle strength. He understood that true protection was not just survival, but calm endurance in the face of fear. As dawn approached, the dark forest began to soften with light, pale rays filtering through thick branches. The child stirred, eyes blinking at the faint glow. The Mandalorian adjusted the cradle gently, a quiet smile hidden beneath the helmet. The long night had passed. The dangers of shadowed forests, hidden predators, and uncertainty had been met with steady hands and a calm mind. The galaxy stretched endlessly before them once more, and the Mandalorian felt the quiet satisfaction of having kept his small companion safe. The ship lifted from the planet's surface, leaving shadows and night behind. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, a vast expanse of possibility. The child cooed softly, the Mandalorian steady at the controls, and together they continued through the vast, silent galaxy, a protector and the fragile life entrusted to him, ready for whatever awaited in the light of a new day. The galaxy shimmered quietly beyond the viewport, stars like silver dust scattered across the dark. The ship glided with steady grace, its hum a constant reminder of the long journey ahead. The Mandalorian sat at the controls, silent and composed, while the child floated nearby, eyes full of wonder, watching the stars as though they were tiny sparks meant only for him. Their destination was uncertain, drawn only by whispers of a hidden route, a path known to few, a corridor through the stars said to lead to safe harbors and secret places untouched by war or greed. The Mandalorian followed the fragments of memory, rumors heard in hushed tones on distant worlds. The stars around them began to shift. Nebulas glowed faintly, clouds of light curling like soft smoke across the black. The ship entered the passage slowly, the Mandalorian's hands precise, every motion controlled as the hidden path unfolded. Inside the corridor, the stars were brighter, closer, shimmering as though guiding their way. The child pressed small hands against the glass, cooing with delight at the beauty before them. The Mandalorian allowed himself a rare moment of calm, absorbing the stillness of this secret part of the galaxy. Yet, even in quiet wonder, he remained vigilant. Every hidden path could hold dangers unseen, pirates waiting in the dark, creatures drifting silently through space, or storms of light that could scatter a ship in seconds. Hours passed, the hidden route stretching further than expected. The Mandalorian adjusted controls carefully, navigating the narrow space between glowing currents. The child had fallen asleep in the cradle, tiny breaths rising and falling in rhythm with the ship's hum. A sudden flicker caught the Mandalorian's attention. To the side, shadows shifted, not natural, not part of the glowing nebula. Something moved quietly, another vessel following at a distance. He adjusted his course, testing whether the shadow would follow. It did. The Mandalorian remained calm, preparing for whatever might come. The way had taught him patience. And now, patience was his shield. For long minutes, the chase remained silent. The second ship held its distance, never too close, never too far. The Mandalorian's hand hovered over the controls, ready but steady, his focus unbroken. Finally, the shadowed ship veered away, slipping back into the glowing clouds. No battle, no words, only the silent acknowledgement that not every encounter required conflict. The Mandalorian exhaled slowly, glancing at the sleeping child. The hidden path had tested him not with blasters, but with calm restraint. At last, the corridor opened into clear space. The stars stretched wide and endless again, the nebula fading behind them like a dream. The child stirred, blinking awake, tiny eyes gazing curiously at the stars. The Mandalorian steadied his hands on the controls, reflecting on the journey. The hidden path had offered beauty, mystery, and quiet danger. And through it all, they had endured together, hunter and child, moving quietly through the vastness of the galaxy. The ship drifted gently through the void, its engines whispering softly in the dark. Beyond the glass, the stars stretched like endless lanterns, guiding them forward across the black sea of space. The Mandalorian sat steady at the controls, while the child floated quietly, small eyes following every glimmer in the distance. Their journey brought them now to a strange and quiet world, a planet with no known name, no markings on star maps, only whispered rumors of silence and mystery. The surface was gray and vast, mountains worn smooth by endless winds, valleys stretching into shadows. When the ship landed, no creatures stirred, no voices rose, only the deep hush of a world untouched. The Mandalorian stepped out, boots pressing into the dust, the child floating gently beside him. The silence was thick, so deep it felt alive, as though the planet itself was listening. They walked across open plains, the wind soft against their armor and cradle. No birds called, no streams moved, no leaves rustled. Only their own steps broke the stillness. The Mandalorian scanned the horizon. The silence felt both peaceful and unsettling, a calm that carried weight, as though the world held secrets just out of reach. The child cooed softly, the sound echoing strangely in the still air. The Mandalorian glanced down, his chest warming with quiet reassurance. Even in this silent place, the bond between them filled the emptiness. As they explored, they found strange stone structures, weathered but deliberate, rising like monuments left by forgotten hands. Carvings etched into their surfaces told no clear story, only patterns spiraling endlessly, symbols without language, markings that suggested a people who once lived here, but had long since vanished. The Mandalorian placed a gloved hand on the stone, feeling the weight of history, imagining the voices that had once echoed across this silent land. Night arrived quickly. The sky turned a deep indigo, stars glowing brighter than ever above the quiet world. The Mandalorian set camp near the stone structures, the child resting safely in the cradle, tiny eyes blinking at the endless night. The silence wrapped around them, yet instead of fear, a strange calm settled over the Mandalorian. Here, in this forgotten world, there was no pursuit, no blaster fire, no threat in the shadows. Only stillness, only rest. As dawn returned, the ship lifted from the silent surface, dust rising in soft clouds below. The world faded behind them, returning to its endless hush, a secret kept by the galaxy itself. The Mandalorian reflected on the journey, realizing that sometimes, silence carried its own lessons. That in quiet, one could hear the truths within. The child yawned softly, settling back into the cradle. The Mandalorian steadied his hands on the controls, eyes forward, ready for the next horizon, the next star, the next step in their endless path. The ship glided through empty space, its engines humming a steady rhythm. The child floated in his cradle, small eyes blinking sleepily at the stars beyond the glass. The Mandalorian sat silent at the controls, helmet tilted toward the endless stretch of night ahead. Yet tonight, the darkness felt different. It was thicker, heavier, as though the galaxy itself was holding its breath. They passed through a region unmarked on any chart, a stretch of stars rarely crossed. Stories whispered of shadows here, not storms, not creatures, but silent watchers who drifted unseen, appearing only when travelers were most alone. The Mandalorian had heard such tales before. He did not believe in phantoms, but he trusted his instincts. And now, his instincts told him to remain vigilant. The child stirred, cooing softly, as though sensing something just beyond the glass. The Mandalorian followed the small gaze, scanning the dark around them. At first, there was nothing, only the quiet glimmer of distant stars. But then, he saw it. A flicker, a movement, a shape that was not a star, drifting silently in the black. One shape became two, two became three, figures gliding slowly, keeping distance, yet always near enough to see. The Mandalorian's hand rested on the controls. He adjusted course. The shadows followed. He quickened their pace. The watchers matched it, not ships, not debris, not storms, but something else, silent, patient, waiting. The child let out a soft sound, half curious, half concerned. The Mandalorian leaned closer, his voice low, steady. "Do not be afraid, I am here." Hours stretched long. The shadows never attacked, never fled. They simply remained, drifting just beyond reach, eyes unseen, presence undeniable. The Mandalorian's thoughts turned inward. Perhaps these watchers were not hunters or enemies, but reminders. Silent witnesses to the path he walked, to the oath he carried, to the bond he now protected with his life. The Way had always spoken of unseen guides, those who watched from afar, not to harm, but to test resolve. At last, the shadows began to fade, drifting slowly back into the vastness. One by one, they disappeared, until only the stars remained, bright and endless once more. The child had fallen asleep again, small breaths steady and calm. The Mandalorian sat quietly at the controls, his heart steady, his mind clear. The watchers had left him with no battle, only silence, and the reminder that the galaxy was vast, and many eyes, seen and unseen, would always follow those who walked their path. The ship pressed on, cutting through the dark. The Mandalorian remained still, helmet facing forward, a quiet guardian in an endless night, knowing that no matter what shadows lingered, his promise endured. The galaxy stretched wide and endless, but now the stars themselves seemed to fade. The ship entered a region known only in whispers, a place where starlight dimmed, where darkness was not just the absence of light, but something heavier, deeper, a veil across the sky. The Mandalorian guided the vessel with steady hands. The hum of the engines was the only sound, a fragile thread against the vast silence. The child stirred in his cradle, eyes searching the dark, small ears twitching at the strange emptiness outside. No stars, no planets, no light, just the ship, a fragile speck drifting in an endless ocean of black. The Mandalorian adjusted his sensors. Nothing, no signals, no energy, only silence. It was as though they had drifted into a place between the beating hearts of the galaxy, a void where time itself seemed uncertain. The child reached a tiny hand upward, grasping for something unseen. The Mandalorian glanced down, his voice calm, steady. "Do not fear. The stars will return." Yet even as he spoke, he felt the weight of the darkness pressing in, a reminder of how small a lone traveler could be in the vastness of the galaxy. Hours stretched. The darkness did not lift. The Mandalorian checked the systems again. All was well. Fuel remained, engines steady, life support strong. Still, the unease lingered. Not from danger, but from the absence of everything else. It was a test of patience, of endurance, of faith that the journey would lead them through. Finally, a flicker appeared on the horizon. One small star, then another, then 1,000 more, breaking through the veil of emptiness. The child cooed softly, eyes glowing with delight as light returned. The Mandalorian allowed himself a quiet breath, steady and relieved. The starless drift was behind them. The galaxy had opened once again, bright, alive, endless. He leaned back in his seat, hands resting gently on the controls. The child drifted back into sleep, comforted by the return of light. The Mandalorian kept his gaze forward, helmet reflecting the stars. The darkness had tested them, but together, they had endured. And now, their path stretched brighter than before, a promise written in starlight. The ship descended onto a world unlike any other. From above, its surface shimmered with light, as though the planet itself were a mirror reflecting the stars. When they touched down, the Mandalorian stepped onto the surface, his boots meeting not sand, not stone, but glass. Stretching in every direction was a desert of crystal, dunes made of fractured mirrors, valleys carved in sharp gleam and reflection. The sun above split into countless shards, casting rainbows across the horizon. The child floated in his cradle, eyes wide, captivated by the endless colors dancing across the land. The Mandalorian walked carefully, each step crunched against fragile shards, the sound sharp in the silence. The desert stretched forever, a world made of broken light. Legend spoke of this place, a planet burned by a star's fury long ago. Its surface melted, reshaped, until all that remained was glass. No life thrived here, no rivers flowed, only the quiet gleam of what was left behind. As they traveled, the Mandalorian saw shapes in the glass, illusions caught in reflection. Sometimes he saw himself, a warrior, endless and unbroken. Other times, he glimpsed shadows that were not his own, passing across the mirrored surface only to vanish when he turned. The child reached out with tiny fingers, tapping the cradle's edge, as though chasing the flickering shapes below. The Mandalorian kept walking, his hand resting near his blaster, though no threat revealed itself. They came upon a ridge where the glass rose higher, shaped like frozen waves. The Mandalorian placed his hand upon the surface, feeling its coolness through his glove. For a moment, he imagined the heat that must have forged this land, a storm of fire so fierce that it had turned stone to mirror. The child yawned softly, the colors still playing across his eyes. To him, the desert was not desolate, but beautiful, a world of endless rainbows and light. Night arrived. The glass desert reflected the stars above, so perfectly that the sky seemed to stretch below their feet. They camped in the cradle of crystal waves, the Mandalorian seated silently, the child asleep nearby. It felt as though they floated between two skies, one above, one below, an endless sea of stars surrounding them. At dawn, they left the desert of glass behind, the ship rising into the pale blue sky. From orbit, the planet gleamed like a jewel in the darkness, a silent reminder of fire, of destruction, and of the strange beauty left behind. The Mandalorian returned to the stars, the child safe and dreaming, the journey unbroken, their path still stretching far ahead. The ship descended toward a quiet moon, green with valleys and silver with rivers. It seemed calm from orbit, a place untouched by conflict, a place where even time itself slowed its pace. When they landed, the Mandalorian stepped onto soft grass, his boots sinking gently into the earth. The child floated beside him, small eyes wide, ears perked at the sound of flowing water. Before them stretched a river, long and winding, its surface smooth, its current steady. Yet as they approached, the Mandalorian realized something unusual. The river made no sound. Water moved, rippling softly, yet no splash, no trickle, no whisper of current filled the air. It was as though the flow itself was swallowed by silence. The child leaned forward, fascinated, as if sensing something deeper in the stillness. The Mandalorian knelt, gloved hand brushing the surface. Cool, real, flowing, yet the silence remained. He looked around. Birds perched on branches, yet their wings made no noise. The grass swayed, yet the wind carried no whisper. The entire valley was alive, yet hushed, as though wrapped in an invisible shroud. They followed the river's path, moving slowly along its mirrored edge. The Mandalorian's steps felt heavier here, his own armor strangely loud in a place where nothing else spoke. The child tilted his head, eyes closing briefly, as if listening to something beyond hearing. When he opened them again, they shone softly, a quiet understanding resting in his gaze. The Mandalorian watched him, realizing that silence was not emptiness, but presence, something unseen, something greater than words. By dusk, they reached a bend in the river where the water pooled wide and deep. The sky above was painted in orange and violet, reflected perfectly in the still water. The child drifted closer, reaching a small hand toward the mirrored glow. The Mandalorian stood behind him, helmet reflecting the same fading sky. No words passed between them, no sound marked the moment, yet the bond they shared felt stronger than ever. When night fell, they returned to the ship. The Mandalorian looked back one last time, at the river of silence, its stillness stretching on, eternal, unbroken. He carried the quiet with him, not as emptiness, but as peace. A reminder that not all journeys required words, and not all truths needed sound. The stars welcomed him once again, the hum of the ship returning, but the silence of the river remained within. The ship glided through a quiet sky, descending toward a world of endless green. From above, it looked like an ocean of trees, stretching beyond the horizon, thick with mystery, thick with life. The Mandalorian landed in a clearing, the canopy above glowing faintly with starlight. When he stepped out, the air was cool, filled with the scent of moss and rain. The child floated close by, eyes wide, ears twitching at the sounds of the forest. Every step into the woods was met with something unusual. The moment a branch snapped beneath his boot, the sound echoed long and deep, carrying far into the trees. When the child let out a soft coo, the noise stretched, repeating again and again, as though the forest itself was speaking it back to them. It was a place of echoes. Not mere reflections of sound, but whispers that lingered, alive, almost thoughtful. The Mandalorian paused, listening as his own footsteps seemed to march long after he had stopped. The child giggled softly, and the giggle returned, softer, smaller, until it faded into nothing. They moved deeper into the forest, guided by curiosity. Every noise they made was answered, returned in strange rhythm. The trees grew taller as they walked, their trunks thick and twisting, their branches bending overhead to form a living ceiling. When the wind blew, the forest answered not with rustling, but with a chorus of gentle echoes, layered and haunting. The Mandalorian's hand rested on his blaster, but there was no threat here, only mystery. The echoes were not mocking, nor menacing. They were simply present, woven into the fabric of the woods. As night fell, the forest glowed with soft light, tiny insects floating like sparks in the air, trees shining faintly with bioluminescence. The child's eyes lit with wonder, reflecting the glow all around them. The Mandalorian settled at the base of a tree, helmet tilted upward to the faint stars that peeked through the canopy. The forest was alive, yet calm, its echoes now softer, a lullaby of repeated whispers. Before sleep, the Mandalorian whispered a few quiet words to the child. The forest carried them away, softly repeating them into the distance, until they sounded less like his own voice and more like something eternal, something woven into the world itself. The child drifted to sleep, cradled by the glowing forest, and the Mandalorian kept watch, helmet gleaming faintly in the light. The echoes sang on, gentle and endless, a reminder that even silence has a voice if one is willing to listen. The ship climbed higher and higher through a world of endless sky. The planet below was hidden by thick clouds, a rolling sea of white and silver. Above it all, a single mountain rose, its peak breaking through the clouds, reaching into the heavens. The Mandalorian guided the ship to a ledge near the summit. When he stepped out, the air was thin and crisp, filled with the hush of great height. The child's cradle floated close, his wide eyes gazing at the sea of clouds below, as though they had risen into another world. The mountain was silent, but not empty. Wind whispered faintly along the cliffs, low and steady, as if the mountain itself was breathing. The Mandalorian climbed carefully, his boots crunching against frost and stone. Each step echoed with the weight of patience, for the climb was steep, but steady. The child peeked over the edge of his cradle, ears twitching at the vast stillness. As they rose, the horizon widened. The clouds below stretched like an endless ocean, soft and glowing beneath the light of the sun. Above, the stars still shone faintly, caught between night and day. It felt as though they were walking the edge of two worlds, the heavens above and the world below. The Mandalorian paused to rest, placing a hand on the stone. The child reached out, touching the air, fingers curling as though to grab the sky itself. By the time they reached the peak, the wind grew stronger, but it carried no chill, only a sense of vastness. The summit was small, bare stone surrounded by endless sky. There, they stood together, two travelers alone at the top of the world. The Mandalorian gazed outward, the horizon stretched forever. The galaxy felt close, as if one could step forward and fall into the stars themselves. The child cooed softly, a gentle sound that carried through the wind. The Mandalorian rested a gloved hand on the cradle, silent, steady. For a moment, the climb, the silence, the vastness, it all felt less like a trial and more like a gift. When they descended, the clouds slowly swallowed the summit behind them, until the peak was hidden once more. But the memory remained, of standing above the world, between stars and sky, where the galaxy felt close enough to touch. The ship descended at twilight, drawn to a valley where soft lights glimmered. From above, the settlement looked like a constellation, a cluster of glowing dots scattered across the ground. As they neared, the Mandalorian saw that the lights were lanterns, hundreds, thousands of them, floating gently in the night air. The city was alive, but not with noise. The streets were quiet, the buildings low and simple. It was the lanterns that spoke here, carrying soft light like drifting stars brought down to earth. The Mandalorian guided the child through narrow alleys, the glow painting his armor in shades of gold and amber. The child's eyes reflected the lanterns, each one a tiny star mirrored in his gaze. Everywhere they walked, lanterns floated. Some hung from wooden beams, others drifted freely above the streets, carried by invisible currents of air. They flickered gently, as though whispering stories too soft to hear. The Mandalorian noticed the people, calm and quiet, faces lit by the lantern glow. They did not hurry, they did not shout, they moved as though time itself slowed within the city's light. At the center of the city, a great pool reflected the sky above. Hundreds of lanterns floated on its surface, their lights dancing on the water. The Mandalorian stood at its edge, helmet shining faintly, while the child leaned forward in his cradle, captivated by the shimmering glow. The people gathered in silence, each releasing a lantern into the pool. One by one, the lanterns drifted outward, joining the others, until the water looked like a galaxy, 1,000 stars swimming in reflection. The Mandalorian and the child stayed long into the night, watching the lights drift slowly across the water. There was no need for words. The lanterns spoke on their own, each one a reminder of hope, of memory, of light carried forward. When they finally returned to the ship, the child was asleep, dreaming with lanterns still glowing in his eyes. The Mandalorian looked back one last time, the city quiet, its lights still floating, eternal in the night. As the ship rose into the sky, the valley below shimmered with lanterns, like a piece of the galaxy resting gently upon the earth. The ship crossed a barren world, its surface endless and pale. From above, the land seemed empty, a sea of sand stretching beyond the horizon. Yet when the Mandalorian stepped outside, the silence of the desert carried something strange, a whisper, soft and endless, woven into the wind. The child floated beside him, ears twitching as the breeze brushed past. The Mandalorian stood still for a moment, helmet turning slowly. The desert was wide, empty, yet alive with faint voices. Every gust of wind seemed to carry fragments of sound, like words too faint to understand. They walked together across the dunes. The sand shifted beneath his boots, smooth and fine, while the child's cradle drifted above it, untouched by the desert floor. The Mandalorian heard it again, the whisper, stretching along the wind. It did not frighten him. It did not threaten. It was simply there, an eternal murmur, as though the desert itself remembered. When the sun lowered, shadows stretched across the dunes. The sky burned gold, then softened to violet. With every change of light, the whispers grew stronger, as if the desert grew louder at dusk. The child leaned forward, eyes following the horizon, his small hands curling in wonder. The Mandalorian slowed his steps, listening, letting the whispers move through him. They carried no clear words, but they held meaning, a presence too large for speech. By nightfall, the desert was silver, the moonlight spilling across the sand. The Mandalorian settled on a dune, armor glowing faintly beneath the stars. The child rested beside him, eyes closing, ears twitching softly at the whispers. The desert spoke on, not in sentences, but in feeling. Calm, endurance, eternity. The Mandalorian sat in silence, helmet lifted to the endless sky. The whispers surrounded him, a lullaby carried by the wind, ancient and eternal. When morning came, the desert was quiet again, its whispers folded back into the heat. But the memory remained, etched in stillness, a reminder that even emptiness can carry a voice. The Mandalorian guided the ship across a quiet world, where the night was endless and the land was dark. But then, far below, he saw it. A river, shimmering as though the stars themselves had fallen from the sky to flow across the earth. He landed near its banks. The child floated close, eyes wide as the river stretched before them, glittering with silver light. It wasn't water, not in the usual sense. It was something stranger, a stream of liquid light, flowing slowly, softly, as if time itself moved through it. When the Mandalorian stepped closer, the sound of the river surrounded him. It was not rushing, not crashing. It was humming, low and steady, like 1,000 voices singing at once. The child cooed, reaching tiny hands toward the glow, and the light seemed to bend gently toward him, as though the river listened. They walked along the bank. Wherever the river turned, the land around it bloomed faintly. Flowers glowed with soft silver edges, and stones shimmered as though dusted with starlight. It was a road of wonder, a path of light in the middle of darkness. The Mandalorian did not speak. There were no words for a place like this. But he felt something steady, a reminder that the galaxy, despite all its battles, still held beauty untouched by war. When they rested at the river's edge, the Mandalorian placed a hand on the ground, feeling the faint vibration of its hum. The child yawned, curled in his cradle, the soft light reflecting in his eyes like 1,000 tiny suns. Above them, the stars mirrored the river below, so that for a moment it seemed they were sitting between two skies, one above, one flowing gently beneath their feet. When they departed, the river shimmered behind them, flowing endlessly, a quiet current of light in a galaxy of shadow. The ship descended into a valley hidden beneath a veil of mist. From above, the world looked silent and empty, but within the fog, shadows of tall spires appeared, rising slowly like ancient guardians. The Mandalorian stepped onto stone ground. The mist curled around his armor, soft and cool, and the child's cradle floated close, its glow faint in the pale air. The silence here was deep, as though sound itself was swallowed by the fog. They walked forward, and the outline of a great temple emerged. Its walls were worn, etched with carvings too old to read. Vines clung to the stone, their leaves wet with mist. Yet the temple stood tall, enduring the ages, patient and still. The Mandalorian entered, his boots echoing faintly against stone floors. Inside, the air was cool, and light spilled through cracks above, shining in quiet beams. The child peered around, his ears twitching as the soft echoes brushed past him. The walls were lined with statues, silent figures carved from the same stone that built the temple. Some stood tall and unbroken, others had crumbled, but all carried the same watchful calm. The Mandalorian paused in the center. Here, the mist flowed in from broken windows, drifting gently across the floor. He stood still, helmet lifted toward the beams of light. The temple felt alive, not with movement, but with memory. He placed a hand against one of the walls. The stone was cold, but beneath it was a quiet pulse, a reminder that the galaxy was older than anyone could imagine, that countless lives and stories had passed through places like this. The child made a soft sound, half a coo, half a sigh. The Mandalorian looked down, resting a gloved hand on the cradle. Together, they stood in silence, sharing the stillness of the ancient hall. When they left, the mist closed behind them, hiding the temple once more. But its presence remained, etched in their memory, a quiet guardian that would stand long after they had gone. The ship glided low over a rugged world, its surface scarred with deep canyons and jagged cliffs. From orbit, the shadows stretched long, like dark rivers winding through the land. The Mandalorian landed at the edge of a massive canyon. The wind whispered softly, rushing up from the depths, curling around the armor with a cold touch. The child floated nearby, tiny hands reaching toward the abyss, curious and unafraid. They moved carefully along the canyon's rim. Below, the walls plunged steeply, darker than the night itself, as though the earth had swallowed the sun. Every sound echoed, every step felt multiplied, and the Mandalorian kept close, always aware of the fragile life he carried. The canyon seemed alive, shadows twisted and danced, moving slowly with the wind. The Mandalorian's eyes scanned constantly, not for enemies, but for the unexpected, for the strange tricks of light and dark. As they descended a narrow ledge, they found small pools of water, reflecting faint glimmers of stars above. The child peered into the liquid, fascinated by the tiny reflections. The Mandalorian knelt beside him, watching silently. Even in the darkest places, there was beauty, a quiet reminder that light always found a way. They continued through the canyon, the walls rising higher around them. The shadows grew deeper, but the Mandalorian remained steady. He guided the child with care, each step deliberate, each moment measured, for one misstep could mean falling into the endless dark below. Night fell, and the canyon became a labyrinth of black and silver. Stars peeked faintly through the cracks above, and the Mandalorian set up a small camp on a ledge. The child curled in the cradle, drifting to sleep. The canyon's shadows stretched long, but the Mandalorian's presence was a steady shield,